Richard, welcome along to the You Can Talk to Me Beatles podcast. Good to connect from across the seas.
Oh, Michael, it's such an honor to be on your podcast. I've been listening to the previous episodes, and you've had amazing guests in the last 2 years. Incredible.
It's very kind of you. This is one of them.
Well, of course, this is the creme de la creme. We're at the apex of the Beatles world now. Yeah,
This is the Mount Everest.
this is where K2 maybe. I'm not sure about Mount Everest.
I appreciate
Look,
that.
My friend Ken Womack, he's the Mount Everest of Beatles academics.
Yeah, I haven't yet spoken to Ken, but I think, as I've said many times on the pod, and you and I were just talking before we started, that the thing I'm finding, which I didn't expect when I started the pod, Beatle people are good people. There's when you do anything long enough, you see patterns. And
Yeah.
what I'm finding in the pattern of conversations with people with that shared love, there's very similar personality traits. There must be something, and I guess it goes back to the story in the music. I think there's definitely unifying factors that people are attracted to when you start talking Beatles with Beatle people.
I think so. It's probably some sort of, I don't want to sound too cliched here, but a bit of a artistic temperament, and being a love of art, because everybody's a fan of something and you get obsessed with something. And sometimes I think if you're a fan of popular music, people are a bit dismissive. But just look at the mainstream. Everybody's walking around in football shirts, watching the World Cup. People's in their fit, all generations, right up to their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And nobody says, oh, they're acting a bit strange because they're
Yeah.
fans. And, sports fans are as eccentric as anybody else. So it's a really deep love. I had a friend once that just didn't like the Beatles. And I mentioned this to Mark Lewison. This is going to be the first of many clunk. There goes the name. There's going to be lots of name drops. But I mentioned this to Mark Lewis, and I said, my friend doesn't like the Beatles. And he said, well, does she not like art?
Huh.
And I thought, that's such a witheringly wonderful
It's
way of putting it.
it's a
Yeah.
great thought. Yeah, absolutely. I remember being a kid and second generation fan, about 8 years of age, and discovered the Beatles. And by the time I was 10, I had the catalogue, and every listen was a new experience because I didn't know what to expect on those albums beyond what I'd heard in the cartoon series, and
Yes.
it just wasn't cool. And I think as a kid, it kind of isolated me, and
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone, and as a kid, being part of something's everything. And
Yeah.
then as you get older, you kind of want to, I find, you want a little more solitary confinement and independence from the pack. But
Yeah.
but as a kid, it was very isolating to be a hardcore Beatles fan when everyone was listening to Kiss or whatever was happening. So
No, it's
ne-
it's
it's
very true. I'm like, yeah, we must be a very similar age, I would imagine.
I'm 35,
Similar.
a sprightly 35.
Yeah, I'm a very sprightly 32 as well. And no one's going to believe this. They can just Google me. But again, a second I'm a second generation fan as well, and I've got memories of the Red and the Blue album. I mean, I was born in the 1960s, and I'm sort of conscious of this, strange phenomenon, sort of, in the background, hovering in the distance. I don't remember watching the Beatles on TV. I have a vague memory of seeing records around the house, and I've got a memory of one of my elder brothers singing Ticket to Ride
Huh.
quite badly
Yeah.
as he walked around the house. But by the time the 70s came along, I was obsessed. And it was a little bit isolating because by the late 70s, everybody was into, which I was into punk and post-punk and
Yeah.
two-tone, the Specials and all of that. And the Beatles were seen as a little bit passe. So at that point, you really wouldn't say it in company that you were a massive Beatles fan. But I just started finding other people that were the same, all listening to them by themselves. I had a little cassette recorder which had one speaker, those old 70s cassette recorders. And I think the two albums I was obsessed with when I was about 10 were Magical Mystery Tour and Sergeant Pepper's, and also Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. And
Yeah.
can you imagine the sound quality? Because it was a really bad sound quality anyway. It was just sounds of, thousands of seagulls, everybody screaming. And then that in a little one speaker,
Mm.
um, and a cassette, it didn't sound too good, but I thought it was amazing. Yeah. I
Yeah.
also,
No.
I also had an older brother who's 12 years older than me,
Even
he's
now, he's
absolutely
12 years older
he's
than you.
he's still it sounds like George Harrison, isn't he? Even
That's
though
right.
yeah, he's still 12 years older than me, I think. And he was a first generation Beatles fan, so he had his own apartment at the top of the house that the rest of the family weren't really allowed to go into. And he had a vinyl collection.
Yeah.
And when I was about 8 years old, I went up and said, "Oh, can you put on a Beatles record for me?" And I expected "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or "She Loves Me." And he put the White Album on. So and I remember hearing "Sexy City," the word "sexy" and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've still got PTSD since that moment. Yeah, but I mean, I would still say since that moment, the White Album's my favorite album ever
Yeah.
of any album.
Yeah,
Absolutely love it.
I say the same thing. I go back to that album again and again more than any other, and just for the fact that it is so rich. And I think you hit on something there for me that the Beatles and my fandom was. It was much deeper than just an experience of loving music or loving the story. It informed a lot of my choices about the kind of person I wanted to be,
Yes,
exploring
yes,
art. Uh, this idea that you could come from very little and do so much if you
yeah,
had
yeah.
an undying belief in what
Uh-huh.
might be possible. Uh, the idea of being led into spirituality and starting, reading deeper into George's thinking about things. So by the time I got into my mid to late teens, it wasn't so much about just music. It was being informed with your own life choices, which was pretty remarkable.
No, absolutely because I went down the arts route. STEM was not for me. I was absolutely emotionally drawn towards the arts, and that probably came from my love of the Beatles. I'd like to do a few subjects that are cool. I mean, I ended up studying English literature, and that probably came from the fact when I was a really little kid, you saw the Beatles, and they were obviously very artistic, and John Lennon wrote books, and the early lyrics weren't amazing, but they scanned brilliantly with the songs. But as their career progressed, the lyrics became really interesting. I mean, Eleanor Rigby is a good poem.
Yeah.
Um, and then again, when I got older and I got hold of Ian MacDonald's Revolution in the Head, and you started looking at all the allusions in that book, to Stockhausen, Berio, to classical music, George Martin's classical arrangements. As we mentioned with the White Album, English pastoral music, folk picking and Blackbird and Julia, satires and parodies of the Beach Boys on Back in the USSR, 8.5 minute experimental classical musical pieces influenced by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. So by the time you just sort of started taking a deep dive into this band, I think it was Joe Wisby was your guest, and he
Yeah.
said that all these just all these feelers are going out everywhere. These
Yeah.
roots are going everywhere, and you just start to get influenced by so much. Just these tentacles are going all over the place, and
Yeah.
you end up, as you say, it shapes who you are and what you do with your life. I mean, um, I've ended up teaching a course at a university in the Beatles, so they actually, I get really well paid for this, and I did start off as just your average English lecturer doing a
Huh.
PhD, and then I became the head of a cultural studies program, and now probably 75 to 80% of my professional life is spent talking and reading about and writing about the Beatles,
Yeah.
which is quite amazing. Sorry, that was Maka. So
Yeah.
I've introduced. Yeah, Maka, be quiet. I'm on a podcast.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I'd love to unpack some of that journey that you've made. When we talk about the power of the Beatles, even with that earlier stuff, I remember as a kid, even I've always loved "There's a Place." I think it's one of the great middle eights in any piece
It's
of music they
beautiful.
wrote. It's such a great
Yeah,
tune, and
yeah,
just that lyrically, I think it's the first glimpse into what's to come when you get this idea of where's that place? It's my mind, and there's no
yeah.
time when I'm
Oh,
alone. And I go, oh,
yeah.
come on, what's even then, right
Brilliant.
out of the
Yeah,
gates, when you sift
yeah.
through the the surface layer of pop and the covers, there's these little glimpses into something deeper going on.
No, absolutely. It was Rob Sheffield in his book Dreaming the Beatles wrote an essay about There's a Place, and I am sort of condensing and summarizing his thesis a little bit, but he said if a bus had come off Abbey Road and plowed into Studio 2 when they were recording that in 1960, after they'd recorded that in 1963 and killed George Martin and killed all the Beatles. And the only recording we had was There's a Place. He went, we'd still be talking about them,
That's
which
great.
is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration because it really does sound different, that song. And also, it really reminds me, I get a feeling that that the lyrics have got that sort of Lennon introspection in them. You know,
Yes.
because Paul's got a very gregarious sense. Penny Lane, he walks through a busy thoroughfare and it's psychedelic and weird, and the wordplay is incredible. Feels like she's in a play. She is anyway. It's just an amazing piece, but it's slightly extrovert. Whereas John's always doing something like Strawberry Fields Forever. Let me take you down because I'm going to Strawberry
Yeah.
Fields. You know, got into his mental interiority. There's that sense with John quite a lot that
Yeah.
he's very solipsistic and very self-obsessed. And as you say, there's a place in my mind. It does it does sound like a very sort of, as we know, quite a hurt, traumatized person
Mm,
who's just constantly developing and shifting and trying to look for some sort of happiness, always
mm.
transforming themselves and always a little bit wary of the world, a little bit suspicious.
And look, you've authored two wonderful books that I'm looking forward to talking about, but I'd like to get to know you. There's one right now. And I'd
Yeah,
like,
I've done the Beatles and Fandom, which came out in 2019, and it did very well actually. That was a book where I looked at all incarnations, manifestations of Beatles fandom that I could. I looked at YouTube videos. I looked at walking tours in London. I looked at slash fiction. I looked at literary fiction on the Beatles. I looked at fan fiction on the Beatles. I must have seen about 300 Beatles tribute bands for that chapter. I went to conventions, I went to academic conferences, and I interviewed about 200 to 300 people about the Beatles,
mm,
and that was such an enjoyable book to do. And then I thought there was a little bit of a gap in the market. No one's really done the Beatles and black music.
mm.
Um, I think that there's only two really proper deep dives into the Beatles and black music. One is a friend of mine, an American academic called Katie Perch, who wrote a book called Blackbird. And I wrote this at the same time because we met up and I said, what are you writing a book about? And she went, the Beatles and black music. And I went, I'm writing a book about the Beatles and black music. So I wrote the Beatles and black music, post-colonial theory, musicology, and remix culture. And on the 29th of January in London, we're having a really big launch for the book. The paperback's out in December. We're going to have a big launch at the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith. There's going to be special guests. There's going to be, I think, people from the Thin Lizzy musical are going to come and sing Beatles songs. I'm going to be interviewed by the screenwriter and playwright Dara Carville, and there'll be lots of celebs and people popping up, and it's going to be an amazing event. And then I've got a third Beatles book actually. I did an edited collection called The Beatles and Humor, where
Huh.
we looked at how the Pythons were influenced by the Beatles, how their press conferences were like stand-up comedy, how we looked at sitcoms in America that had references to the Beatles in the 1960s. So I've got I've got three books out on the Beatles, and I've got another couple of books coming out next year, not really strictly on the Beatles. I'm also working on the Beatles in Ireland, which maybe I shouldn't say too much because
Yeah.
it's becoming a complete obsession. In fact, I bumped into Paul Muldoon,
Hmm.
the Irish poet, and who did lyrics of Paul
Yes.
McCartney, and we had a really nice chat about it. And he was going, Paul doesn't see the link. He was saying, your man doesn't see the link between the Beatles and Ireland. And I was going, yeah, and Muldoon must have spent 6 years with him, was it,
Yeah.
editing the lyrics book?
Yeah.
And he says, I keep kind of telling the link is there. And I went, he's wrong, Paul. There is a link. There's a very strong link. So
Yeah.
the first person I'll send the Beatles in Ireland to is to MPL in Soho Square, and he can read up on the Beatles in Ireland.
That's wonderful. That you've been quite prolific, and obviously there's a great passion in there, but I
Yes,
get a sense there's an intuitive nature for critical thought that obviously exists in you. Do you have a sense of when that began in you as a younger man? This natural sense to be inquisitive deeper than a surface layer?
that's that's a very good question. I think even from the from ground zero, from the year dot. I think that you, me, everybody really um, intuits quite a lot of profound perspectives on a phenomenon. It doesn't matter if you're into films or you're into Disney or you're into the Beatles or Harry Potter or the Chronicles of Narnia, or Star Wars. I think when you're a very, very young kid and this first impacts on you, sort of that sort of cultural phenomena, popular culture phenomena, I think when that um, it impacts very deeply on you, and you intuit certain things that you just instinctively know. It's only as you get older and you start reading critical theory, you start reading more books, and you start put and you and in a way you put flesh in the bones there, and you can say, oh, the Beatles are post-colonial subjects that wrote just as Britain was losing its colonies between 57 and 64. Oh, they're not just a white psychedelic group. The first two albums are full of cover versions by, African American girl groups. You start
Huh.
looking into the psychedelic music. You start stuff that you knew when you were younger. You start to build up this knowledge of it, and it's like I think popular culture is just a way of encountering really, really deep ideas through something that's very popular and very accessible.
Mm.
I mean, when I wrote the Beatles in Fandom, I ended up, I think, the main one of the main arguments there was that the grand narratives of history collided with the popular culture, because you start reading about the Beatles and you go, oh, if they'd been a little bit older, when they were supposed to have been playing the Ed Sullivan Show in '64, they would have been in the British Army. Only conscription was abolished. Oh, the Butler 44 Education Act. Oh, they three of them got into grammar school, so they're going to write quite good lyrics. They're going to be quite curious people. Also, consumer boom in the 1950s as well. Butler's 1948 health service are going to be, was enshrined and was enacted in '49. So the Beatles are healthier, stronger. There's a consumer boom. Liverpool's got it's such a musical city. As one of the biggest ports in Britain. The slave trade was coming in and out. Sugar, tobacco, all of that. So this whole melange of big history, sort of, you can read it through a popular text,
Mm.
just through a song. I mean, I'll give you a quick example of that. That Paul McCartney's father, James McCartney, was in a traditional Dixieland
Mm.
jazz group called Jim Mack's Jazz Band, and they played Dixieland jazz. And then you go, I wonder what he did for a living. Oh, he was a cotton salesman.
Cotton. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the 1860s, the cotton's going through Liverpool. One of Paul's relatives worked in a tobacco factory. Uh,
Mm.
all that Dixieland music is surrounding Paul as he's growing up. His
Yeah.
first instrument was a trumpet. His dad gave him a trumpet pre-rock and roll because that was the cool instrument. So even something like colonialism, if you like, the British colonial project, just by looking at Beatles records and by their love of black music, you're starting to think about really big themes like
Yes.
like colonialism. And when you go
Yes.
really, really back to your little kid, you start looking at this group and it's all in there, these really deep perspectives on them, and it fleshes out later. So it's an ongoing thing. So you're constantly getting fresh perspectives um, on the Beatles. It changes all the time. I mean, I would say that the 224 or 213 or whatever number it is, Beatles songs, those are songs mostly in the folk tradition that will last for hundreds and hundreds of years, just on the quality of the songs.
Mm-hmm.
But people like us, the fandom, the huge, the huge fans around this phenomenon, mean that the Beatles image, the Beatles music, uh, the look of the Beatles, the sound of the Beatles, everything about them is morphing and changing and transforming. So fans are keeping it alive all the time as well. Because before you started recording, we were talking about, oh, it wasn't like, oh, let's be all nostalgic and look back to this group in the 1960s. It's not archive fever or mild archive and unhealthy obsession of the past. The first thing we said to each other was, in 2027, there's going to be the Sam Mendes 4 biopics, and you're going told from 4 different perspectives like a Netflix um, series, and you see it from four different perspectives. I think we're going to go into the cinema and watch all four straight
Yes.
through, like
Yes.
binging Netflix, which is really strange.
Yeah.
I hope people don't go in halfway through Ringo or when George starts. That would be
Yeah.
really unfair.
Yeah.
But there's, and also as well, the Beatles have announced that they've bought 3 Savile Row, the site of the rooftop concert on the 30th of January 1969, and that's going to be turned into a fully interactive, um, immersive Beatles museum.
Yeah.
So right at the start, we didn't go, oh, do you remember Love Me Do on the 5th of October 1962?
Yes.
Oh, that was great. Oh, they were great back then. It never seems to be that way when I discuss the Beatles. It always seems to be in the present tense and the future tense. And
Mm.
I hadn't really thought of that too much, but that's where we started. We started, projecting into the future with the Beatles.
It's very good.
And
Yeah.
I do think it's a phenomenon that can just be twisted any way, um, any way the fans want to.
Mm.
It can be integrated into the web and the weft of the fans' lives. I mean, just look at fan fiction and literary fiction and slash fiction. That's not even to do with the music. That literary manifestation of the Beatles phenomenon is absolutely incredible, and God knows where it goes. I also think that you've got me off on one here. I'll stop in a second.
No, not at
On the
all.
22nd of November 1968, the Beatles released the most iconic rock album of the 60s, the White Album. Then in 2003, Jay-Z did the Black Album. But then Danger Mouse in 2004 mashed them both together, mashed hip hop and rock. And then he put in a 20th century classical musical sensibility as well. And what you got out of these two classic texts, a classic hip hop album and a classic rock album, you got this new work of art,
Yeah.
which was basically reimagining and just like painting a statue on the Mona Lisa, being really iconoclastic, been really subversive, been really imaginative, really intelligent, really inventive about the Beatles. So yeah, the White Album's going to go on for hundreds and hundreds of years as it is, as a great piece of art. But we're going to muck around with it as well, and
Yeah.
so it's gonna bloom all over the place. It's going to be completely ubiquitous.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. The book, just to for our listeners, is the
Sorry,
Beatles.
I went off on one there, Michael.
No,
I got a bit
please
excited. Yeah,
let's go
yeah,
exploring. This is wonderful.
yeah.
The Beatles and Fandom: Sex, Death, and Progressive Nostalgia. When did the idea of that even hit you? Because it's so specific. I'm just curious where that realization
Oh
was
no,
that.
no, that's a really nice, that's a lovely question. I I was just sitting there and I thought, right, I've always wanted to write a book on the Beatles, and I thought there's been so much ink has been expended on the Beatles, cuttlefish like, over the years.
Yeah.
I said, how can I get a new angle on the Beatles? And I would say to people, I'm writing a book on the Beatles, and they'd go, well, there's nothing new to say about the Beatles. And every time I said I'm going to write a book on the Beatles, everybody said, oh, there's not much new to be said on the Beatles. And then when I looked into it, there absolutely was so much new to be said on the Beatles. And I just latched on to looking at the Beatles and fandom and looking at how the fans appropriated the meaning of the Beatles phenomenon
Mm,
into the web and weft of their own lives. I mean, and that I went right back to Beatles Monthly in 1963, the fanzine, and I
yeah.
started there, and I moved forward right up to the digital spaces that we live in now. You go to Abbey Road, you immediately make an Instagram video of it, you upload it, people comment
Yeah.
on it. Suddenly, this physical space has become digitized. So I started with real print media back in the 60s with the Beatles and fandom, where especially the letters page, their young demographic, especially if girls would write in and say, "Oh, I think George should get his hair cut. It's a bit long. Oh, Paul
Mm,
looks gorgeous after he's come back from his holiday in Greece." And it was all about the fans making these, living vicariously through these stars and
yeah.
making these stars part of their life. So it was already very uh, transgressive right at the
Hmm.
start. So it was really about the fans. I mean, it's a bit obvious, but the Beatles phenomenon is as much about the fans, obviously, as the band themselves. And then, so once I got that sort of lens to look at the Beatles
Yeah.
phenomenon, you'd be watching something like the Hey Jude recording
Huh.
on the 4th of September 1968 at the Twickenham Studios, right?
Yeah.
And after you'd watched it a few times, uh, you were getting more obsessed looking at the fans, because
Yes.
when they sing Hey Jude, I know it's all rehearsed and it was planned and everything, but the fans get on stage and sing along with the Beatles. And you're starting
Mm,
to pick out faces from the fans and find that fascinating. Then you go back and look at the Shea Stadium concert. The Beatles are completely engulfed in screams. And before they come on, the camera's just going around the audience looking at banners that fans are holding up, fans trying to jump over the barriers and get to the Beatles. This crazy big event. And you're going, sort of, it's not in a way really about the Beatles. It's more about the fans in a sense. I suppose it's very obvious. It's a quid pro quo. Without
yeah,
without fans, there's no band. I mean, you can make art in your garret, but if you're not
yeah.
going to go out and negotiate with the commercial world or the real world, it's not. It doesn't really work. And because the Beatles were so big, the fan story seemed to take on a life of its own.
Could you take us into this idea of sex and death? Because
Yes, both ones. Both ones.
it's a bold title, and I'm wondering for people that may
Oh
have
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. I had a joke for that, so I could say yes, both once in a lifetime experiences. To quote the Woody Allen line, who nobody
yes.
mentions his name anymore. Um, yes, well, sex was very interesting. Interestingly, when Beatles Monthly started in 1963 and ran for 77 issues, the demographic was largely female of people that wrote letters in. So I went to the British Library and read all the letters, and I got together all 77 issues of Beatles Monthly, and there really was a very highly charged sexual subtext to this. Well, not even subtext. Sometimes it was quite explicit.
Mm,
I mean, and look at the concerts. There's something very, very erotic about the Beatlemania, especially in America for the first time. There's a feminist scholar called Barbara Ehrenreich, wrote a book called Dancing in the Streets.
mm-hmm.
And she said that that wave of female Beatles fans in the 50s, their role models had been, buzz cut football players in high school and, macho Elvis with his quiff and James Dean and all of those sorts of people, Tony Curtis, and as I say, high school jocks. And 50s high school in America, women were not really encouraged to do physical sports. They could be cheerleaders, and there's
Mm,
there the whole template for them was to meet a guy and get married and sort of go to the suburbs and do quite well. They were supposed to not get involved themselves a little bit. So I do think, sociologically speaking, here, I put me in Sud's corner. It was like just taking the roof being blown off when this young demographic could go and see these sort of effete Europeans with long hair who are slightly androgynous, who dress in identical uniforms. They nod their heads together in a really high falsetto. It's a whole different type of masculinity. So I'm not
yes.
surprised they screamed and shouted. I mean, I would have been right in the middle with them screaming and shouting because it was something really, really different. I suppose there was Bobby Soxers with Frank Sinatra and people committed suicide after Rudolph Valentino died. But I think because of the
Hmm.
technology and the media, it got spread more. And I think perhaps sociologically speaking, there was a new sort of freedom or sense of emancipation creeping in by the late 1950s. So there was certainly the Beatles were obviously boomers and took lots of advantages of that historical context, but so did the fans. They had disposable income. They had their own little cults, their own little lives, and also almost like Magic Mike or the Chippendales are seeing these good-looking guys have fun and make this very visceral music. And
Mm,
this very visceral music was, it wasn't cynically done this way, but it was directed at romance and love, in a younger female demographic. So it's not surprising everybody went crazy. I mean, Love Me Do, I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You,
mm,
P.S. I Love You. All the hits from 62 to 65 were on the subject of love. It's only in late 65 that their lyrics started getting a bit more interesting. So
mm.
these lyrics were directed at the fans, and you've got this amazing symbiotic relationship there between the Beatles and their fans, and absolutely. There's a sense of feminist emancipation about the screaming and the craziness. Because when
Yeah.
you watch older commentators in the 60s going, oh, these young girls are going to have to, they're going to have to do the school run one day and, be housewives. And how are they going to do that behaving like this? That was one of the first broadcasts in America when
Yeah.
Beatlemania started. And, adults then just thought this is just childish and silly and ridiculous. But
Yeah.
it wasn't. There was a real deep sense that it was an expression of emancipation in a sense. I mean, this sort of hysteria, as I said earlier, had happened, whether it was Rudolph Valentino or
Sure. Yeah.
Elvis Presley, but now it's couched in the sort of mass media. So it's ubiquitous, it's getting spread an awful lot. And that story Bob Geldof said about the urine almost in the aisles and the screaming
That's a
and
far
the
better way
sexual,
to describe it. I wish I'd grabbed that
yeah,
first.
yeah. But that sexual frisson that you saw at the concerts,
Yeah.
that you hear in the music, and that is in the pages of Beatles Monthly. That's the sex aspect of the Beatles and the sex aspect of popular culture. Also, that sort of female emancipation,
Mm.
going to concerts in 63, 64, and having these objects that you can scream at. I mean, turning the Beatles again into the web and weft of your own life, making it something that's very special to you. Having your room a shrine to the Beatles, having all the records.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I've put up a screensaver so you can't see how embarrassing my room is. But that's the sex aspect. Also, the death aspect was a little
Also,
bit.
not to slow you down before we move into the death aspect, because I really want to do that with you. But I'd love you to tell me what you think of that quote from George about from the anthology. They used us as an excuse to go mad, and then they blamed it on us. What do you think he's talking about there in terms of a bigger idea?
I think that I think he's a little bit, to quote the Ruttles, a bit shocked and stunned by the hysteria and the
Yeah.
experience that he went through. I mean, it can't. When you're a very, very little kid and you watch A Hard Day's Night and Help on television, you want to be one of the Beatles.
Yeah.
Just when you're a kid, when you watch James Bond, you want to be James Bond. And it just looks like fun and all excitement and all the plus side, and it looks very glamorous. But as soon as you grow up a bit and you read about the experience of touring between 63 and 66, it seems a real nightmare. And George Martin said he said it was a hell of a life. He don't know how, he wasn't sure how they survived it. And he said that the Beatles suddenly became the nation's pets as well. And he said
Mm.
the royal family were born into this. They were
Huh.
just these, sort of artistic, sensitive misfits really from Liverpool who are suddenly in the eye of a hurricane. And I suppose it's going to just seem like totally bizarre and wash over you. And George Harrison said that they give their screams and we give our
Our
nervous
nervous
systems.
systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't know. It's funny about George. He always seems a little bit ambivalent about being famous because he did see
Mm.
the dark side of it, and he seems just a very sensitive, private person who had trouble with, I think, that side of celebrity. I mean, I mean, I think he was more temperamentally suited to be a Jesuit priest,
Yeah.
but he finds
Yes.
himself in a white suit singing Beatles songs or whatever, or a Shea Stadium suit. So it was a massive, massive shock
Yeah.
to his system. Um, yeah. So yeah, remind me what the question was again.
No, I
I've
think
gone off on one.
I think you answered it, and I think in uh, your journey there, taking us into what was happening culturally at the time, kind of answers it in its own way. You were about to sort of move into this idea of how death features
Yeah,
in this story. Could you touch on that a little bit and just tease that out a bit?
yeah. I mean, I didn't want to touch this with a barge pole when I first wrote the book, but I did a draft of the Beatles and Fandom, and one of a friend of mine, a friend of mine, and a very good academic called Mark Duffett. Um, he wrote a book about. He wrote a chapter about the dark side of Beatles fandom, and there was a big debate about John Lennon's murder
Mm,
and whether Mark Chapman was a fan or not.
mm,
Whether the media just created him as a crazy fan, and all fans were a bit weird. There was a huge academic debate about what Mark Chapman represented and what about Lennon's murder. And I didn't want to touch it with a barge pole because it was just so unpleasant. But I couldn't write a, you know, I couldn't write a book that was sort of vaguely definitive about fandom, without looking into the dark side of fandom.
mm.
Because when I teach my Beatles course at university, I put up a picture of the Beatles first, and I go through all their date of birth, all their date of birth, and then when I say all their date of births. I say why that was significant with when they were born. You know, why when they were born in that period, why that was so significant when they were born, and I tell them about what happened to their lives, etc., etc. And I said, look, but we're going to say there's a dark side to fandom, because if you look at those four young men, one of them was murdered.
Hmm.
Another one of them, you know, barely scraped, got away with his life. He was nearly murdered, and he died a year or 18 months later. And when they pled Manila, they barely got out with their lives. There's rumors there was bullet holes in the back of the plane. They were getting death threats. There's this whole dark side to fandom as well. So I want to remind you, when you do the course, we're gonna do a lecture on the side of fandom. I mean, and just to ignore it, I think would have been um, not really looking at all aspects of fandom. It would just be
Yeah.
looking at the light and the breezy. But I
Yes.
wanted to look at some of the dark as well. So it should be addressed. I mean, if you talk to people that know anything about Harry Styles or the One Direction fandom or Taylor Swift, there's the same issues are going on. It's very it's very, very dangerous to be that famous a celebrity, because you're going to attract all sorts of unwanted attention. And that's exactly what the Beatles did.
Mm.
So in a way, George is right. They give their screams, but he gives his nervous system. And sometimes you think it's a bit, he's a he's a bit moany about it, George Harrison, because I mean, if you're going to be a performer, it's a bit naive to think you're not going to get a lot of attention. But
Yeah.
he does make a very pertinent point that, um, you know, his health, his life, his family was very important, and there wasn't much privacy ever, especially when you're that famous.
Yeah. And
I
it's
don't know.
interesting how much death informs the character development, particularly of Paul and John.
hmm
You know,
That's a brilliant point. I mean, if you think about Let It Be, Mother Mary comes to me. Paul's mom, Mary Mohan, Julia, about John's mom, and Paul and John got very close, obviously, because they um, both had lost their mothers at a very young age. Paul was, I think, 14 when his mother died, and John was 17 when his mother was killed. So there's this sort of uh, real melancholy to a lot of Beatles songs, a real sense of loss, a sense of regret, and I love the way that they write about women in their songs. Paul really writes these songs about hardworking, tough women. Like his mum was a nurse, and he doesn't have a memory of getting up at 4 a.m. in a freezing cold Liverpool day and seeing her cycling um, off to work. And his songs are full of that. Lady Madonna, these even in his solo careers, lots of songs about these really tough go-getter women going out and trying to
yeah,
make the best of things.
yeah,
Also, Paul and John write two other sort of female characters in their songs. They've got quite often they're getting, strangely enough, quite often the Beatles are in the songs. The speaker in the song, the protagonist in the song, is quite often getting dumped by women. You're going to lose that girl. She's got a ticket to ride.
yeah. She's the
Those
kind of girl
those
that puts you down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's always this. Paul and John. There's always this woman that's leaving them.
Huh.
Is lost, and
Yeah.
that adds a melancholy as well as the explicit songs about losing their mother. And then there's the Lucy in the Sky sort of dream, exoticized feminine others that drift away as well. You know, what was it? Picture yourself in a boat on a river. Look, was it suddenly Lucy's gone? She's disappeared. There's this really interesting the symbol of the female in Beatles songs and in their solo career. Um, you can hear that sadness in those Beatles songs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
That's a great take. The Beatles and black music, post-colonial theory, musicology, and remix culture.
Oh my gosh, that's heavy.
And again, I don't know how much of this life for you has been by design or by inspiration. I get the sense it's kind of a
Yeah,
combination of both. When did the when did this lightning bolt hit you that, and you did touch on it earlier,
yeah.
here's a
I
space
was.
that is
Yeah.
waiting to be told and unearthed.
This. Yeah. Again, what happened was I was at a Beatles conference about um, 2012, around that period, and one of the panelists said nobody's written a book on the Beatles and black music. So I put that one away in my notebook. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And then I was out having drinks with a colleague, and this colleague's a very self-confident chap who really is um, very certain about his opinions. And I said, I'm thinking of writing a book called The Beatles and Black Music. And he went, that'll be a short book. And I went, I'm not quite sure what I said to him, but there might have been a few expletives in there.
Okay.
And that sort of sat with me for a bit. And I went, I better look into this. And the more I looked into it, I went, no, 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 no. It's actually going to be quite a long book.
Yeah.
And in fact, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 volumes about it
Yeah.
because, um, again, you like me, we're probably of a similar vintage, and we probably got into the Beatles at the same time. I remember watching the Beatles movies in the late 70s on the BBC. The Beatles to me were all to do with Britishness, British nationality. They were to do with white psychedelic rock. They were the nation's pets. I didn't really see much connection with the Beatles and black music because it wasn't couched like that. And the music industry became very binary, didn't it? In the late
Mm.
60s, soul artists were placed over here and white rock artists were placed somewhere else. So you got Woodstock and you got, I don't know, what was it, what stock or whatever. The two things were were very, very separate. But the more I looked into it, I went, the Beatles are absolutely informed by black music. I mean, look at their early interviews, and one of them, George Harrison, is asked, "What sort of music do you like?" And he goes, "Oh, it's black artists you probably won't have heard of." To the interviewer, because the Beatles were sort of, to use 60s parlance, they were hip about this. They
Yeah.
saw themselves as cool R&B kids, and between 61 and 63, they're absolutely obsessed with African American girl groups. And when you think about the connection there, John, Paul, and George, a bit like a Motown group, they wore matching uniforms, matching haircuts, they sang three-way harmony, and they did 2.5 minute standardized love songs. So that the Motown soul African American um, female tradition was there, which is very, very interesting.
Mm.
Again, if we look at Please Please Me and With the Beatles, there's songs, cover versions by the Shirelles,
Yeah.
by the
The
Cookies,
Marvelettes.
uh, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Marvelettes, all of those artists. So this isn't just, we're not just talking here Chuck Berry and Little Richard, which was
No.
their influence, their 50s black heroes. We're looking at the how soul music and how African American girl groups really influenced the Beatles, and that's again where I started with the first two albums. That's where I started the Beatles and black music, and how they approached those songs. That was just incredible.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that had been sort of an aporia. It sort of been left out. It was not something that I really grew up feeling was part of the mainstream Beatles story. Like that friend that said, "Oh, the Beatles and black music will be
Yeah.
a short book." So from there, it just got. I just got more and more obsessed with this, and the more I looked into it, yeah, Liverpool's a colonial city. Liverpool was wealthy from the slave trade.
Yeah.
Paul's dad was in a traditional jazz band. He was a cotton salesman. The Beatles used to play in the Jacaranda Club in the late 1950s with Lord Woodbine, who was
Hmm.
a black calypso musician. Um, the story just went back to the Beatles' parents,
And I
then
don't mean
back
to
to
cut you off, but I'm thinking that comment from a friend of yours about it'll be a very short book almost becomes the motivation to deliver it, doesn't it? Because it tells you, it gives you a snapshot into a market that might be thinking very much the same. It's almost like an aha. You, there is a story here, and it's greater and deeper than
yeah.
you think.
It's very true. I mean, every narrative any narrative you hear has got some sort of ideological position, whether it's unconscious or not. So
Interesting.
when you look at history, or you look at the history of music or the history of pop culture, it's just the same. It's a very partial history. But music doesn't have borders, or it doesn't have passports. It mixes all the time. So
Yeah.
European classical music was influenced by, African kettle drums. These things were meeting.
Yeah.
A Beatles text is um, interdependent, mixed up. It's a hybrid. It's
Yeah.
a hybrid of black and white music. Rock and roll's a hybrid of white country and black music, and the Beatles are absolutely the same. The more you look into it, you see the soul connection to their songs. Even the most psychedelic stuff. I mean, when you look at Revolver, which is the big Beatles psychedelic album,
Mm.
got to get you into my life, is Motown pastiche. Taxman is sounds like a Motown record as well. In fact, they wanted to go to America and record
Yeah.
Revolver in, wasn't it? Stax they wanted to go and
Yeah.
record it.
Yeah.
So, even then the Beatles are sort of psychedelic hippies, but they're sort of soul boys. Isn't there a book by, I think it's Steve Turner wrote a book called Beatles 66, and at the end of it he listed the Beatles 4 jukeboxes, because they all had jukeboxes in their house with their little 45 singles. And I went, oh, this is going to be interesting. Let's look at what is George Harrison like in January 1966. He's going to like Bob Dylan. He's going to like the Byrds. He's going to like Indian classical music. I don't know. He's going to have all these singles of, the Stones, right? Out of those 40 records in his jukebox, 34 were by black American rhythm and blues artists,
Yeah.
and a huge proportion, not just rock and roll, blues, R&B, and African American soul groups and Motown. Even
Yeah.
at that stage, when they were embracing the whole hippie counterculture, or creating the whole hippie counterculture, soul music was front and center of their
Yeah.
personal taste. And then you look at Ringo, Paul, and John's jukeboxes, very similar.
Mm. Mm.
You get hovering
Yeah.
around, out of 40 records, 30 of them are
Yeah.
by black record, but
I,
by
I,
black
I
artists.
always thought "Call Me Back Again" had an Otis Redding vibe to
Oh
me.
yeah,
Then
yes,
you get
absolutely.
George with Ronnie Spector and "Try Some Buy Some,"
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
connection that was there. There's this the connective tissue runs through the years apart as well, doesn't it?
Oh no, again, the last chapter of the Beatles and black music. I look at the Beatles solo careers just to tie it all up.
No spoilers.
They're yeah. I'll say just one little spoiler. I do find a big influence of black music in their solo career.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. Wings music had been mashed with dance artists as well.
Yeah.
Um, George Harrison's writing an extra texture. He's writing soul songs, Pure Smokey and
Uh,
You. Um, John Lennon in the late 70s wants to do almost make Double Fantasy a reggae album, Living in Borrowed Time.
yeah.
Um, McCartney's love of, hip hop, and when Danger Mouse brought out the Black Album, Capitol were outraged and immediately sent a cease and desist letter to Danger Mouse, because obviously he had infringed copyright. But personally, Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney absolutely loved it. They're very inventive, creative guys, and I love the fact that their music was mixed with hip hop. So, really from sort of pre-colonial history and coming up to Paul and Paul's, the Beatles families, they're all really into trad jazz and jazz music. And then solo Beatles as well. They're into disco, they're into reggae,
Yeah.
they're into hip hop. And all these forms get mixed up. These genres all get mixed up in their solo careers, which is absolutely fascinating. I think the discography at the end of this book's probably longer than the book. So
Yeah.
if you're going to read any of the book, just look at the discography. There's a
What
good
might
listening
be
at the end of it.
what might be your favorite solo collaboration? Maybe particular, I guess we're talking Paul. I've always
Oh
thought,
yeah,
and I came to love it more as I got older. What's that you're doing from Tug of War with Paul
oh
and
yes,
Stevie?
Stevie Wonder.
It has kind of
Yeah,
grown on me from a production perspective and a funk soul perspective.
oh
Is there
absolutely.
is there a particular one that stands out? I know you're not going to tell me The Girl Is Mine,
No,
or are
I
you?
wasn't going to say. I was going to say Ebony and Ivory, or Say. No, both of those songs are addressed
Yeah.
in the book. I don't mind them. They're okay. Um, I mean, I'm trying to think about one particular song. I would say in roughly around 1975, Paul recorded one of his dad's songs
Mm,
with the Country Hams called
yes.
"Walking in the Park with Eloise."
Eloise.
Yeah, "Walking in the Park with
Yeah.
Eloise." That is when I do talks on the Beatles and black music, that's the first song that I play
Huh.
because his father wrote it. It's traditional jazz,
Yeah.
and then Paul covered it, and then Paul said to his father, "You wrote this song," and his dad went, "No, I didn't. I just made it up,"
What a great
which is
line.
very interesting as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, look, even it's always there in Beatles albums, the influence by black artists. I mean, I love when Paul McCartney did Band on the Run. So he went to EMI Studios in Lagos,
Mm-hmm.
and he went to see Fela Kuti, and he was moved to
Yeah.
tears by how
Yes.
brilliant the music was. So then Fela Kuti was getting a bit of attention. So in the press, he said, "Paul's here to steal the black
Yeah.
man's music." So, as you know, he went to the studio and Paul played him Band on the Run, and he went, "Nah, you're not here to steal the black man's music," and they became very good friends. But the point is, every little album or every little story about the Beatles, when you start looking through the Beatles story, the story we all know well, the mythology, the canon, the cliches, if you just shift it slightly and start looking at the Beatles' work and the Beatles' influences and the Beatles' history as not just white rock music, but coming from black music, it completely, the ground moves underneath you. It shifts your perspective, and you start seeing every song in completely new light. I mean, I Call Your Name is ska.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
Deal, the Daz, a ska song as well. When Paul moved up to Mull of Kintyre and was painting his house, he was listening to his Trojan reggae box set. Um, this is it's not just that, which sometimes academic books have a propensity to get a weird little idea and build up a 500-page book around a spurious little idea. And that's what I thought might happen at first, but it's completely the other way around. I really didn't have to do too much heavy lifting in the research because it's it's all there. It's just they're absolutely. I mean, look at the cover of my
Yeah.
book
That's
of
right.
Mary Wells.
Yeah.
I really didn't have to try too hard.
Great shot.
I mean, I do like the cover actually. I mean, I write about colonial history in the Beatles. I write about Lord Woodbine, the calypso musician when they played with him in Liverpool. I write about the cover versions and Please Please Me and with the Beatles. I mean, Rubber Soul. I write about
Mm.
Rubber Soul. It's called Rubber Soul, Plastic Soul, man. You know, White Boy Soul. Revolver's got a Motown influence. I write of how Atlantic Stax Motown and psychedelic soul influenced the Beatles. In fact, white psychedelia influenced black artists as well. You ended up with the Temptations doing, you know, psychedelic soul by the end of the 60s as well.
Yeah.
I look at how the Beatles how the Beatles were mashed by Danger Mouse and Danger Mouse mashed Jay-Z with the Beatles. I look at post-colonial solo Beatles after the breakup. So I really, it was this stuff is front and center. It wasn't like it's a weird niche little thesis that I had to work really
Mm.
hard to build up.
Yeah.
I could easily write another volume of this book.
No doubt. I think there's something you're touching on takes me back to a comment Oliver Murray made to me, who was the director of the Now and Then short that came out when the single dropped. And he also
Yeah,
directed Anthology 9, which I thought
yeah,
was
yeah.
probably the best 70, 80 minutes of assembled Beatles doc content that
I,
I'd seen
I
in years.
I agree with that. That was
It's
really amazing.
wonderful, just
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
and beautifully cut. Um, he had a beautiful insight, which I think you're kind of tapping into when you were saying a moment ago about, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, how easy it was to kind of find so much that told the story because it was right there. And he was saying visually it was kind of the same for him, is that because it was such a short period of time that they were in the world,
uh-huh.
and you get all these colors over that short period of time, that you can hop from one chapter into another chapter quite seamlessly, particularly from a visual perspective when you're storytelling. And he said the challenge was, or the fascinating thing was, you're getting a quote out of 63 or 64 about something from one of them, tying that into an idea that's in 67. And it's a completely different looking band. They don't look like the same people. But what's wonderful about it is it's all there for you because it's so condensed
Yeah,
and easily accessed. And then obviously you're going in there and digging into the earth underneath.
Yeah.
It obviously continues to inspire you. This is, and I've said this many times, and I know it gets said by lot of commentators. It's a great era for Beatles authorship right now, and it has been for some time. It's been
I
getting
agree.
it's
Yeah.
been getting far more critically thought out and detailed. And I think you and I were talking before we started recording. As you get more distance, the story gets richer, and the detail tends to rise to the surface. You must be really pleased that you're
I think,
contributing in such a way.
well, that's very, very kind of you to say that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a growth area in academia because we're just far enough away from it to give it academic credibility, and we're just far enough away from it where it's fresh and exciting. And thanks to technology, we have access to all the music and all the films and all the pictures and all the magazines and all the digitized stuff.
Mm,
I mean, if we go back and look at the Romantic poets, we can't listen to them or see them. That's very interesting. So I think Beatles scholarship is in the Goldilocks zone. It's just far enough away from the sun to get heat and life, but it's also far enough away to have a little bit of objectivity on it as well. So
that's
I absolutely
beautifully
believe
said.
that. Well, also I think that when we've got people like Mark Lewison and Ken Womack, um, and a lot of scholars off their ilk are doing really, really interesting work. Katie Perch and Christine Feldman Barrett wrote a great book on a woman's history of the Beatles.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, yeah, really, it is. I think it's a really exciting time because in the last 20 years, people are really digging into this and really analyzing it properly. Um, I mean, you're like me, I suppose. When I first got into the Beatles in the 70s, there wasn't really much to read about the Beatles. There was
no,
Roy Carr's big book with all the albums. There
yeah,
was Alan Williams wrote a crazy book about
yeah,
the man who sold the Beatles in their
yeah.
Hamburg days.
Nicholas Schaffner, The Beatles Forever.
Nicholas Shaft. Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, that's true as well. But there wasn't any. It did sort of indulge a little bit in the old cliched story, a little
it
bit of the
did.
mythology.
Yeah,
And then after John Lennon died, we got Philip Norman was the really big book,
yeah,
and he's a very controversial figure
he
now
is.
because he said in his Shout book is just he says John Lennon was three-quarters of the Beatles and ignores
Yeah,
everything else almost.
yeah,
But that was the sort of that was the Beatles literary landscape
yeah.
back in the mid 70s to early 80s. And then it started changing. I do think that Mark Lewison did amazing work. And I think that Ian MacDonald's Revolution in the Head that came out in 1994, I think
Thereabouts. Yeah,
it was like a mix of a popular book, but also it had an academic and historical perspective. And it also, as he was a musician, there was a musicological perspective to the
mm,
Ian MacDonald book as well. So post 94, we've been sort of we're drifting off into all sorts of strange little areas, aren't we?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it really is. It's just going to keep growing. I would expect. I mean,
yeah.
I do this thing called Beatles London Beatles walks. I was approached to do it. It wasn't. I didn't. I just was approached to do it by a company, so I set it up. And I was at Abbey Road a week ago doing one of my little walking tours of London, of Beatles London. And the demographic, everybody was from 18 to 30, graffitiing the walls of Abbey Road. You know, 12-year-olds buying Beatles t-shirts.
Yeah.
So this whole commodification, all that, it's huge. It's a part of the national story of Britishness.
Yes.
The Beatles, because look, you think about it. I went up when I wrote the Beatles and Fandom and handed out questionnaires with people and asked them where they visited when they were in London. This is especially, tourists, obviously, American tourists. And they said three places: Buckingham Palace, uh, Shakespeare's Globe, and Abbey Road. And Abbey Road's just a zebra crossing. And a lot of people told me they got to Heathrow and went straight in a taxi to Abbey Road.
Yeah.
And actually, about a month ago, I
Yeah.
was up there and there was a huge van delivering stuff to Abbey Road. And the guy reversed into the wall. You know the two big pillars at the
Yes.
entrance? He reversed into the wall and it all smashed to bits and fell all over the pavement. There was like people around the age between 18 and 22 were running up and picking bits of the
Yeah.
plaster and the brick and sticking them in their pockets. And then I met this Brazilian guy a bit later and I said, well, that was weird, wasn't it? the truck drove into the wall, and he went, "Yeah," he said, "look what I got," and he took out a bit of brick. And I thought he was giving it to me as a present, so I went to take it, and he got really annoyed. "You're not having my piece of brick. Get your own piece of brick."
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it was weird. And then he had the album, and he was pointing, "Look, there's where the truck went in," and you just go on this level of scrutiny and obsession is just unbelievable. But I think everybody's a fan of something. I think everybody
Yes,
does this.
yes, yes,
Look, just go out, walk out the door. Everybody's walking around in football shirts.
yes.
People are obsessed with, as I said, Harry Potter or Star Wars or C.S. Lewis, and it's high culture as well. If you go to Dublin on the 16th of June in a year, everybody is walking around in bowler hats, tracing Leopold Bloom's walk around Dublin on the 16th of June 1904, when Leopold Bloom in Ulysses does his walk around Dublin. People are recreating that. If we go to Whitby in England, in Yorkshire, there's a Gothic festival there because that's where Count Dracula first set foot on English soil. So we go
Right.
there. These literary novels have got people dressing up as the central
Yeah,
characters.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I would really posit that people that would feel they're the most down to earth and they're not very artsy and they're not fans, but they are. Everybody's a fan of something and obsessed with it, and it makes people more interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I wished I'd spent my time learning 7 or 8 languages and could speak Arabic and German really well, but maybe I was better off diving into the Beatles. I don't know.
I'm just curious when you say you're running these courses, and as an educator, what brings you the most joy? You must have interactions with
Yeah,
students and
that's a
attendees.
brilliant question.
Where does that joy? What's the joy for you?
My joy is that people that don't know anything about the Beatles,
Right.
they've no preconceptions. Because if you play a song or show a clip, it's really interesting to hear what they've got to say, and you can
Right.
never expect what they're gonna like. Once I played, Revolution from the famous clip from the David Frost show in September 1968, and they were all stunned and went, "Oh, that's absolutely brilliant." And then I would play a song I think they'd love, and they go, "Oh, I don't like that very much."
Right.
It's just to see people with no expectations what they come up with. I had a young woman about 21 who was a massive Kinks fan, so this is a good start. And she went, "The only 60s group I like are the Kinks. They're much better than the Beatles." By the end of a 13-week course, she was going, "Oh, the Beatles, maybe I like them just as much now."
Yeah.
So it was my brainwashing worked, even though I love the Kinks. I don't know. Yeah, it gets hold of people. It's got a life of its own. Every new generation, if it's millennials or Gen Z, they approach this canon of work in a completely unique and different way, and that's what I like so much about it. I mean, you know this. We all know this. The most streamed Beatles song on Spotify is
Yeah.
"Here Comes the Sun." A George Harrison song.
Yeah.
Everybody would be expected to be a Paul or John song.
Of course.
So a new generation went, "That's the song we love most."
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting.
It is
That
it. Yeah.
they don't have any expectations, really. I mean, I've heard the silliest and funniest things
Have you?
ever
Yeah.
about the Beatles from the class. I can't think. There's hundreds of them.
Sure.
I should have collected them all down
Yeah.
about how the silly thing, the brilliant things that people say.
Yeah. I
So
can
I
only.
like people. I like people that just take a fresh perspective on this
Yeah.
canon, really.
There's a story that I'd love as we start to wind up. There's a story I heard you tell once. I'd love you to tell it now. You made me smile when I heard it.
What was
You when
that?
you had a brief interaction with Paul McCartney, and I think it
Oh
was
gosh.
was
Yeah.
it at the British Film Institute at a venue?
Yes, I've got
Yeah.
you've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Would you mind sharing? I thought that was a great story.
well, I went to see the British Film Institute was screening Magical Mystery Tour. I think it was around 2013,
Right.
and they had the screening at 9 p.m. And I arranged to meet a friend outside the BFI at 7 p.m. so we could go and eat food and drink beer before we saw the film. And unbeknownst to me, the celebrity premiere was happening at 7 p.m. and I was there. There was nobody there. And on the riverside of the British Film Institute, cars weren't really supposed to be there.
Right.
But this big limo came up to me while I was texting my friend, telling her to hurry up. And the car came right up beside me, and I was still texting my friend, going, oh, that must be somebody quite famous. Little did I expect that suddenly Paul McCartney was about 2 inches from my face, and I had my phone, and I sort of dropped it and didn't know what to do. And I went, Paul, can I shake your hand? And by this time, he was walking towards the BFI, and he said, yes, of course. And he turned around and he shook hands with someone else. So I followed him doing little robotic steps on my hand extended, going, Paul, can I shake your hand? Paul. And I thought, you think you're going to be cool when you see someone like
Yes.
that, but I wasn't. I was a total idiot. And I'm not really that impressed by celebrity, but as soon as I saw McCartney, I just went to pieces.
So you never got the handshake?
No, he shook the hand of the guy beside me. I must go and interview
That's
him.
great. Did you guys talk?
I'm going to give him. I'll give him a copy of this book.
Yes.
We just said hello.
There you
Yeah.
go. That's a lovely
Yeah.
segue. The book, The Beatles and Black Music, Post-Colonial Theory, Musicology and Remix Culture. Where should people go to find it, to find you? And can you tell us a little bit more about the release?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do something that my publisher gets really annoyed about. Don't buy my book. No, it's first what I'm published by Bloomsbury, and what they do is they bring out a hardback, which is really very expensive, prohibitively expensive. It's about 60 quid, but they
Right.
usually sell, about 1,000 of those to universities, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, everywhere. And then about 6, 7 months later, they bring the book out in paperback. So it's available in, Barnes and Noble, Waterstones. It's available in Amazon. It's available direct from Bloomsbury. And the paperback is about 20 quid. So it usually, after the hardback has gone out and sort of explored the territory a little bit, then the paperback comes running after it. And it's available everywhere. I'm doing a launch of the Beatles and Black Music on the 29th of January at the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith. We're going to have people singing Beatles songs. I think we're looking at getting some people from the Thin Lizzy musical to come
Yes,
and
yes.
sing some Beatles songs. I'm going to be interviewed by a screenwriter and playwright called Dara Carville. There's going to be lots of famous people. It's going to be fun. And I'll be signing copies of the book afterwards. So hopefully I could sell somewhere in the region of 50, 60, 70 books on that one night.
Yeah.
So the paperback is out in December. So my little joke is, don't buy my book. But by that, I mean, don't buy the hardback. And it's bad for your university. But please go and buy the paperback in December, because I think I've been told it's a really good book.
Yeah.
That guy from Nothing Is Real podcast, Stephen Cockcroft, do you
Hmm.
know him?
Yes. Only
Yeah,
by name.
I was in Kinsale in Ireland, and he interviewed me in a bookshop where I was selling copies of the hardback, and he said to me, "You should completely rewrite this book as a totally over the top commercial book, because it's brilliant and it would sell loads." And I went, "He's absolutely right, but I don't know if I've got the energy.
Yeah.
I might just leave it the way it is, and the next book's going to be really commercial."
Yeah, the next one. There's a
Yeah.
quote I found from author Stephanie Phillips. No doubt you're aware of it.
Oh yes,
She
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 actually she endorsed the book.
Yeah, and I read that she'd said successfully recontextualizes black artistry firmly back into the rock narrative. What a wonderful, succinct line. You must be happy.
Yes, yes, fantastic. Thanks, Stephanie, wherever you are.
What do you hope when you think about this is important work and as we discussed, great contributions into Beatles scholarship. What do you hope is the legacy of the work that you leave behind? What do you hope it does going forward?
I I've got quite a serious take on that. I think that Beatles songs remind us that um, songs are hybrids. They're not Songs are happily mongrelized.
Hmm.
They're mixed up. They're impure. Um, there's no Music doesn't need a passport. There's no borders there. So what we get, I mean, just very quickly, I'll sum this up in a couple of seconds. When I started writing this book, because I work at a university, we have a thing called the research assessment exercise. So you have to get a really sort of a very cogent, a very strong theoretical perspective on a book if it's going to get 4 stars in the ref, which is the highest you can get. And my last two books have got 4 stars exactly because I took a deep dive into the theoretical literature. And the theoretical literature, I looked at the Beatles and black music, which hopefully will be the legacy of this book. It's quite serious, actually. There's a political sense to this book But we'll just put that to the side for a second. The political sense is, look, you can be dispossessed. And if you're dispossessed, you have to make really strong assertions of identity, who you are, or else you'll get manipulated and exploited. I suppose the Irish went to New York and Chicago and immediately got together in communities and unionized.
Huh.
Same with all sort of dispossessed communities. They would get together and they would try to make things better for themselves. So in no way am I marginalizing political struggle and firm assertions of identity. That's great. I agree with all that. That's on one side. But the rest of my book is that it's where cultures integrate and collide in the middle, and we get this third space, this zone where music mixes and integrates. And I think that's a very, very radical space that transforms who we are and can make us see the world differently. And the books I looked at Paul Gilroy's The Black Atlantic, which looked at how Anglo-individualism went to America, and you got very individual expressions of art, especially in music. And I thought that he would really concentrate on maybe, very strong assertions of Black identity. But all the texts he wrote about were the Black Atlantic is about integration and mixing of texts. And that was really incredible. So then I went and read Dick Hebdich's book, Subcultures, from the late 70s, and he writes about two-tone and about mixing of texts in a British context. I read The Irish Philosopher, who says that our identities and songs, the Irish philosopher Richard Kearney says that we're happily mongrelized. I read an author called David J. Gunkel. He wrote a book called Off Remixology, which said texts are mixed, like the White Album, the Black Album,
Huh.
mix the Grey Album. I looked at Jack Hamilton, an academic who's got this idea of the racial imagination, which is a little bit like the philosopher Homi K. Bhabha that talks about the location of culture is a third space in the middle between two fixed assertions of primordial identity. So what we've got racial identity is a mix in the middle. We've got where is culture? It's in the middle. I looked at George Kahn wrote a book called Audiotopia and Bluetopia. Those are the concepts he wrote about in his book. And that's very like third space. That's very like happy mongrelized. And Audiotopia is this transformative zone where you hear music, a bit like the people that heard Elvis first didn't know if he was black or white. You're in
Yeah.
this third space of exchange and hybridity and mixing. I also looked at Jacqueline Warwick's work on girl groups. So really, to put it, I'll try to finish up in two sentences. I think that I would challenge anybody to pick a song, pick a piece of music, and not find that there's a multiplicity of various strands from all sorts of cultures that make up that music. Go back to European classical music. Oh no, they were taking influence from African music. Any piece of music you look at is going to be mixed up. It's going to be a hybrid, and that's really what I'm saying in this book. I think George Nelson wrote a book called The Death of Rhythm and Blues, and he looked at how the music industry in the 60s became binary, that you had black soul and you had white rock. And that's because when the lawyers and the accountants and the machinery of the music business gets involved, it sort of separates music to sell it in certain genres and to certain audiences. But the truth is, we inhabit a third space, we inhabit an audiotopia, we inhabit a third zone with music. And I'll just have one line I just want to finish with, because the epigraph for this book is a line from Mark Duffett, who really inspired me to write this book. He's an academic that wrote about Elvis Presley, Mark Duffett, and I just want to dedicate this podcast to Mark because he passed on last year. He was only 54, and he was a massive influence on this book. So I used his words as the epigraph for the book. And here's what he said about the Beatles. I love this quote. I think the Beatles were a kind of Orientalism and absurdity, taking the piss out of colonial attitudes. I think that really sums the Beatles up. They're sort of jesters at the court, making impertinent remarks. They're sort of taking bits of culture for wherever they want, and they're creating these strange hybrid texts, a bit like Edward Said's Orientalism. They're exoticizing the Indian other. They're exoticizing the Caribbean other. They're exoticizing the African American girl groups, but
Hmm.
um, they're not. They're exoticizing it. Yes, they're doing that, but that comes out of a sincere feeling of love for this music, and in a way, they are exoticizing it a bit. It's a bit like, it's perfect, but in their own way, they're ridiculing colonialism, because let's just be honest about this. The Beatles are post-colonial subjects, because between 1957 and 1964, Britain was losing its colonies at a rapid
Hmm.
pace. So they really are. It's a book about post-colonialism, and post-colonialism is after colonialism. And after the empire radiates out all over the world and comes back to somewhere like London, you're going to get multiculturalism. You're going to get mixed
Yes.
texts. You're going to get music that is informed by all sorts of cultures. How it's sold and distributed is one thing, but really, if you look at the essence of a musical text, it is it's impure, it's interdependent, it's mixed up, it's happily mongrelized.
Yeah. Richard Mills, you're that rare mix of not only a great mind, but also a great personality. This has been a terrific conversation for me to have with you. One
Oh,
I know our listeners are really going to enjoy. And as I said to you, I think at the beginning, one of the things I love about this podcast for me selfishly is to be able to talk to people like yourself and broaden out my
it's
own
a
view
brilliant,
and
Michael.
appreciation for the
The
story.
guests you've the guests you've had in this podcast are absolutely amazing. So maybe end with a bit of humour, because I
Yeah,
got a bit sort of overly sincere in the
not
last
at all.
minute or two. I think your next guest should be my cockapoo Maka. You've met him already. You've seen
I've
him on
met him.
camera.
I
Yeah,
wonder if you should tell people who he is.
exactly. I know that people have switched off now. I've got I got a cockapoo about 2 years ago, and
I thought you
we
were just happy
called
to
him.
see me.
Yeah, no, well, I am very happy. So is Maka. Um, so I called it Maka after
Yeah,
my hero, Paul McCartney.
of
So
course.
little Maka, and I live in leafy West London,
Yeah.
and I took Maka for a walk in Bushy Park about a couple of months ago, and Maka's running along, and if you're a dog owner, you meet other dog owners. So this other dog runs up, and I say to the owner, "Yeah, that's a nice dog. And what's your dog called?" And he went, "Ringo."
Yeah.
And I went, right. I went, "Ringo, meet Maka." So like
It's great.
the laugh I've had out of calling my dog Maka is just great.
No, I think that's great. My mother's Pomeranian is called
Yeah.
Ringo.
No.
So there you
Great
go.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's out there. And my brother's got a dog called Barry, not after Barry Wom, but
Oh, let me
after
keep having Barry Wong. But I was
after
going to
my
say,
dad.
Michael, you would have had I think it would have been a much better podcast if you had interviewed Maka.
Yeah. Well,
He
maybe
knows the importance of a pregnant pause.
Richard, thanks for sitting with me and being here for the
Oh,
podcast. I'm looking forward to what comes next from you and best wishes with the upcoming release and
yeah,
everything that's still ahead.
I'm working on about 3 or 4 books. It's intense. It's really serious. But
Yeah.
just to iterate, I'm a massive fan of your podcast. It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And thanks for giving me a reminder of why I love doing it. Great to talk to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Michael.
All the best to you.